Rosa decides to help Zorro infiltrate El Rojo's compound. Is Diego's sister really starting to come around to believing her brother is the legendary bandit? Let's find out in our review of Zorro, Man of the Dead, number 3, from Massive Publishing. See you in 3. And welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of Zorro, Man of the Dead, number 3, from Massive Publishing. In this issue, Zorro and Rosa set on a mission to infiltrate El Rojo's compound to steal incriminating evidence for the DEA. But before we get started, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for notification, and your attention is greatly appreciated. Please stay tuned through the end for the final score. You don't want to miss it. Let's talk about the credits. Zorro, Man of the Dead, number 3 is written and drawn by Sean Gordon Murphy, colors by Simon Ghosh, I think, and letters by DC Hopkins. Sean Gordon Murphy also did the main cover. If you're new to the series and we're sort of new to Massive Publishing, this is the first title we're reviewing from Massive. Let's recap because we got a hold of the first 2 issues to kind of bring us up to speed on where we are in this issue before we get into the review. The story is set in modern day in the town of La Vega, and the patriarch of the family, Alejandro, is a big, super huge Zorro fan. Many years ago, El Rojo, who is the lieutenant of the drug cartels, came to town, took it over, and when Alejandro showed some defiance and some resistance to El Rojo's presence in the town, El Rojo killed Alejandro's son, Antonio, and shocked the children, Antonio's 2 children, Diego and Rosa. After a number of years, we come to find out that now when they're grown, Diego has been living in a monastery-type Spanish fort with his grandfather Alejandro, and his grandfather has been training him as though he were Zorro. And Diego has been mute the entire time since witnessing his father's death. Rosa, on the other hand, basically turned into a life of being a street rat. She joined the gangs from El Rojo just as a matter of survival, and she has come up in the ranks as a Class A getaway driver. But nobody in El Rojo's gang knows that Rosa is Diego's sister, therefore Alejandro's father. So that's the context in the background. Now what's set the stage for the conflict here is that the DEA has gotten wind of drug tunnels that are going under the border, and evidence has come to light that Alejandro, the grandfather, is secretly been feeding information to the DEA, possibly with the intent of bringing El Rojo down and destroying the cartels. A conflict ensues when El Rojo and his men go to visit Alejandro, and Alejandro is killed. In that moment of death, Diego, who has been mute this entire time, snaps, and he assumes the role of Zorro. So now he believes he's Zorro. It's a very Don Quixote-esque kind of setup. He kills the guys who killed his grandfather, except for Trejo, who is one of the main lieutenants of the gang. And then he rides off into the night. Eventually, Rosa gets wind that her grandfather has been killed, even though nobody inside the cartel knows Alejandro was really her grandfather. And when she goes to the fort to find out what's going on, she crosses paths with Diego, now dressed as Zorro, and he talks as though he is Zorro. He talks like he's stepped right out of a classic 1940s black and white Zorro film, and he firmly believes he is Zorro. There's no breaking character, there's no in and out, you don't see any kind of reality bending conflict on his face. He believes he's Zorro. And so Rosa thinks he's crazy, and she's constantly trying to convince him to escape, run. You've killed some of the guys in El Rojo's cartel and his gang. We've got to get out of here. He won't go. He's determined to be the hope of the people of La Vega, and he's going to inspire a rebellion. Everybody's going to gather behind him. They're going to rise up, and they're going to overthrow the drug cartels, starting with their leader, El Rojo. So that's the context and the backdrop for where we are right now. In this issue, there is increasing chaos as El Rojo is trying to maintain control in La Vega. He burns down the church. He starts kidnapping people as hostages for interrogation. And the DEA is now breathing down the neck of everyone involved. And so Rosa and Diego figure out that if they can break into El Rojo's home compound, steal the information that he has on file about drug shipments, tunnels, and what have you, and get that over to the DEA. The DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, for those who don't know, will come in with reinforcements, capture all Rojo and all his men, or kill them, and free the town of La Vega. And so that's where we catch up now. What happens in this issue, though, is that there is a glimmer of hope, maybe a small one, but there's still a glimmer of hope that even though Rosa does not necessarily firmly believe that Diego is actually Zorro, or at least maybe even the reincarnated spirit of Zorro, she's still willing to believe in him. She's still willing to get behind him. And then that makes them basically a formidable team. They break into the compound. They steal the files because they're working on stealth, while El Rojo is, and the majority of his men are scouring the town looking for Zorro and anybody who might be part of their blossoming rebellion. When Diego and Rosa finally get all the files they need and try to sneak out of the compound, Trejo and his men show up, and there's a fight, and Zorro is shot. Whether it's mortal or not, we shall see. That's where we end on the cliffhanger. So there's a lot of background there, and hopefully that was very informative and kind of gives you the sense of where this story is headed. But essentially, it's a mix of Zorro, but in a sort of Don Quixote type context where the guy believes he's Zorro even though he's not the original Zorro, and it's a question of belief and faith, and where do you really is belief strong enough to really make you? Can you will yourself into being something that nobody else believes that you are simply by believing it strongly enough? And that's the context of what the core concept of this series and why it works, I think, well. What do we like about Zorro, Man of the Dead #3? Great action, lots of gritty violence. People definitely get killed, some of them in very brutal ways. Zorro is not afraid to put his sword right through some guy's skull and or take his head off or whatever else. And when you see the mix of gunplay and swordplay, you think there's no way that could work. The way Sean Gordon Murphy portrays it here, it absolutely works. It feels strange and a little bit surreal because of the context of a modern setting, but it absolutely does work. And so this is maybe not a classic Zorro story, but it is a classic Zorro spirit, which is, I think, the draw here. So if you're a Zorro fan, as we are, and I am in particular, it's not exactly right, but it's close enough to be interesting. What didn't we like about the issue is there are you have to give some suspension of disbelief that the Diego could survive gun battles and do all the acrobatic things that he's doing without, except for the last page on this issue, without coming away with just a bullet wound or a scratch. He should have been dead probably several times throughout the series. So you really have to suspend the disbelief that he's able to pull off some of this almost superhero level of acrobatics to survive and to also defeat his enemies, who are in some cases armed to the teeth. Plus, he also has a little animal sidekick called Bandido, which is a small fox. And this has to be the most well-trained and obedient and self-aware fox that you've ever seen in your life. So there are definitely some elements of it. Although Sean Gordon Murphy definitely presents this as a grounded mix of fantasy and reality, where you are sort of drawn into the idea that the impossible is possible. There are definitely some points in this where it's like, yeah, that's a bit much to swallow. So you have to kind of give yourself over to it rather than just going with it. The fox in particular, and his ability to survive just a hail of bullets is sometimes a little hard to swallow. But if you're willing to go past it quickly and just let the story go and play out as it's intended to, you're generally speaking going to have a good time. What about the art? This is Sean Gordon Murphy we're talking about, so this is fantastic art. The character designs look great. The costumes in particular look great. Zorro, you have to get the costume right to kind of buy into it. And Gordon Murphy really does a great job with the costume. Of course, the compositions and the panels and the drama and the shadows and the lighting and everything else, visually speaking, works. This is a beautiful looking comic. And it's quintessential Sean Gordon Murphy. So if you like Murphy's art, you are going to love this comic, visually speaking. final thoughts. What do we think about Zorro Man of the Dead #3? It's an interesting concept. It's an intriguing idea. The story of bringing the past into the present, partly through somebody's delusion, but somehow being convincing enough that he brings everybody along with him, is always an interesting idea and a fun idea. And generally speaking, the execution and the art look great. Uh, on the downside, which is I think a minor downside, you have to suspend disbelief in several spots, particularly when they're having these gunfights and he's just running around with a sword, and the fox is somehow joining the battle in the most well-trained display of animal animal participation you've ever seen, which is not, it doesn't happen a lot, but it's enough that you're like, I don't know if I'll buy into that. Therefore, we're going to give Zorro Man of the Dead #3 from Massive Publishing, I think, a well-deserved 9 out of 10. Hope you enjoyed this review. Before you go away, what are your thoughts on Zorro? Do you like your Zorro stories and pulp stories in general that come from that era? Do you like them to be period pieces and very specific and sort of their time? Or do you like the idea of bringing those pulp stories forward and retold in a different context, maybe with a different spin or a different twist? How do you like your pulp action heroes? Let us know in the comment section. I'd like to hear your opinion. Otherwise, thank you very much. And if you like more reviews just like this one, please stay tuned through the outro.